Hello everyone, and welcome back to Automobilista 2. It's been a while. I do believe that my previous video that I made on this game, I had said that that was going to be the last AMS2 video that I would make. But as I'm sure you can see by the length of this video, not only was that not the case, but I've come back with quite a substantial one. So today what I want to do is I want to cover the latest update to AMS2. And in the background here what I've done is I have put footage from the race that I did earlier today, which was, I did an hour-long practice session, 15-minute quali, and then a 45-minute race. Multi-class at Daytona. I was in the DPI car, and I had AI in DPI as well as in GTE. At the moment, we've got some practice on the screen, so you're going to see lots of crashes, lots of spins, lots of weird AI-ness going on in the background. We'll then show you a quali lap, and then we'll get into the race. Essentially what I want to do during this video is kind of talk you through my thoughts on AMS2 at the moment. It's gone through a lot of changes since I last played it. There have been a lot of improvements. There's a lot more to say than I had said in previous videos, and so I just wanted to cover some of the additions, some of the changes, some of the improvements, and kind of share my thoughts as to the state of the game at the moment, and also my hopes on the game's trajectory. With the latest update, so this is version 1.4, there's been a lot of talk in the development update from Reza Studios, saying how this kind of marked a point in the game's lifespan where they felt that future updates would take a slightly different approach in terms of the way that content was being delivered, or the way that improvements to the game was being delivered. And they felt as though version 1.4 was basically where they were happy with the game. They felt like it was not finished, but at least kind of feature complete, and where they felt like they could be proud of the game as a finished product. So I think there's never been a better time to review AMS2, and that's essentially what today's video is going to be. I have got close to 100 hours in AMS2 in terms of playtime. I have driven not every car in the game, but a large portion of them, quite a lot of the different classes, and I have driven most of the tracks. I do own the DLC. I did buy the game in early access. I have played it through every different update, through every iteration. I do primarily play in VR, which of course is what you're seeing in the background, but I've also played the game in 2D, and I think I've got a pretty broad understanding of the game. In case anybody listening isn't familiar with my background in sim racing, I'm primarily an Assetto Corsa player, Assetto Corsa 1 that is. I have obviously played ACC, I have played a little bit of AMS1, a little bit of rFactor 2, and I have played a bit of iRacing as well, although still my primary simulator has always been Assetto Corsa. I do have quite a lot of experience with the Project Cars games, specifically Project Cars 1 and 2, so I am quite familiar with the Madness engine, and of course, as I said, since AMS2 has been out in early access, I've got quite a lot of experience with it. So, as I mentioned in the background, this is a race that I did earlier today against the AI. You can see I've got some footage here of me kind of fiddling with setup and things like that. What my aim was for this race was to finally get comfortable with AMS2. So I wanted to get into the groove that I can really jump into with AC very quickly, but obviously in another simulator that I'm not quite as familiar with, it takes me a bit more time. So in ACC, for example, a game that I hugely respect and do enjoy, it takes me quite a long time to get back into the groove when I go back to that game, because it's not my primary sim, because GT3 is not my primary choice of car. It does sometimes take me a bit of time. And the same is true with AMS2. So I am going to be speaking about this game from the perspective of somebody that has struggled to get used to the differences between AC and AMS2, and I just want you to bear in mind that everything that I say is coming from the perspective of an AC fan. If you're somebody that doesn't like AC and you're interested in playing AMS2, then obviously take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, because it might be the case that what I'm saying I dislike is something that you would really actually enjoy, because if it's a difference from AC and I prefer the way AC does it, you might actually prefer the way that AMS2 does it. But I'm going to do my best to try and articulate all of my thoughts in a way that should be understandable, no matter what your background in sim racing. So yeah. In a moment, we are going to jump into a qualifying lap, but before that happens, there's a quick rundown of my setup on the screen if you want to pause it and see what settings I'm using on the DPI car. You can hop back into that setup screen, but here is my fastest quali lap. I will shut up and let you watch. Okay, so I'm sure that you can agree that wasn't the most amazing lap in the world, but it was the best that I could do. I only had an hour's practice, and that was the first time that I've properly put time into the DPI car and properly put time into the DPI car at Daytona as a result. Anyway, AMS2. So where are we with this game? It's been out for quite a while, and I've driven quite a few different iterations of the game. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the positives. I do want to be positive about this game. There are a lot of positives to say. So let's go from the top. What is the best part of AMS2? Well, I think that the footage in the background is going to be a great example of what is the best thing about AMS2, and that is immersion. If you are interested in a simulator that makes you feel like you are in a car, in a race, that has all the features that allow you to, simulate the real racing that you might see on TV, I think AMS2 does a great job of giving you all those features. You have weather, you have time of day, you have dynamic tracks, you have AI, you have a wide selection of cars, a wide selection of tracks. There are things like the real-time and live weather systems where it will actually give you real-time or historical weather data so that you can input that into your game. There are loads of things and loads of tools that allow you to play AMS2 in a way that's immersive. And I think there's no better way, obviously, than to play AMS2 in VR. Now, I play all simulators in VR. VR is just the way that I like to race, but AMS2 has got to be one of the best simulators for VR. Firstly, it looks amazing. Now, the footage in the background here, I do not have the game on max settings. Even with my rig, which is a 9900K and a 3090, you can't run this game on a Valve Index at 144 frames per second on max settings. It just doesn't work. In fact, you might see at some points during this race, especially during the night time, so this has a full 24-hour day-night cycle during the race, you might see during the night time that I get some frame drops, so I apologise in advance for those. But that being said, relative to other simulators, this game runs brilliantly. If you've played ACC and your system can't run it, AMS2 will run fine. If you've played AC with loads of AI and complained that the performance goes down massively as soon as you've got AI on track, you will be fine with AMS2. And if you've had issues with other simulators in terms of inconsistencies of performance from track to track, from car to car, from weather setting to weather setting, AMS2 is definitely better. There's one thing that is definitely the case with the Madness engine, and that is that it runs well and it looks good. If that's all you're interested in, this is definitely the game for you. You're about to see some spectacularly terrible driving from me, so hold on, because I apologise in advance for this. But as I mentioned, this race was me kind of getting to grips with the car and the track. So as you can see from this, the race you're going to see is going to be a bit of a fight back from the back of the grid, because I spun and I didn't want to restart the race. I could have restarted the race, but I chose not to. Anyway, so graphically, the game is amazing. I will say audio, while it's good, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a high point of the sim. If you've played a lot of Race Room, I definitely think the audio in that game is better. And I think that there are certainly mod cars and like sound mods for AC that make that game sound better. I wouldn't say that AMS2 by any means sounds bad. I mean, you'll be able to hear a lot of the audio in the background right now, and you will have heard it when I had the audio up during the qualifying lap. The game sounds good, but it's not exactly class leading. So if you're wanting something to really blow your ears out, if you've got a brilliant surround sound system for your sim rig and you want to play the best audio experience, perhaps AMS2 isn't the one for you. But I think, to be honest, on balance, with all the other positives in terms of immersion, and with how decent the audio is, I don't think it's a major issue, all things considered. So, immersion, as I mentioned, definitely a positive thing. In terms of just pure features, the game is very feature complete and is very easily accessible. It's easy to play online, for example. I think one issue that a lot of simulators have is that they aren't developed by people that are used to making modern multiplayer games. I realise that PC gaming and sim racing in general has a history of doing things like hosting servers and connecting to servers and using server browsers, and I don't think there's any issue with that. But to be honest, modern matchmaking has just been a thing that's kind of replaced that. Now, AMS2 does not have matchmaking, so don't expect this game to have some kind of ranked searching system like it would in Gran Turismo or in iRacing or anything like that. But what it does do is allow you to host a lobby and just invite your Steam friends, and you can locally host that. You don't need to spin up a server, which makes it so much more accessible to just play with your friends. If you're a casual sim racer, or if you're just getting into it, and what your aim for sim racing is to be able to jump into a track, jump into a car, have a bit of fun, do a short race, do some mixed conditions, do some weird combinations of cars and tracks, mix it up a lot with a group of friends, and you just want it to be as simple and easy as possible to get into and just have some fun, I think AMS2 might be the best sim out there at the moment. And it's simply because you don't need to set up a server, you just load into the multiplayer, host your own lobby, invite your friends through Steam, and it works. No other sim, other than Project Cars 2, which, as if you've paid attention to the news, as you may know, is no longer or won't be listed rather on the Steam store coming very soon. Basically, AMS2 stands alone in that functionality. It is I don't think it can be overstated in terms of how great that is for accessibility. In terms of single player racing, obviously there's AI. The AI is okay. The footage in the background is, as I mentioned, from a multi-class race, and you will see some weirdness with the AI. I have the AI on 120%, which is the highest difficulty. I have them on high aggression, which isn't the highest setting, it's one below. And you'll notice that they are perhaps slightly too aggressive. And I think they could probably be a little bit faster, because I've not really been driving that brilliantly during this race, and I am, well, I don't want to spoil it, but I am pretty quick relative to the AI at least. So yeah, the AI are fine. You can load them up really easily. You can use them in multiplayer, I think, which is fantastic. But it's really easy to just hop into a single player race as well. There are a bunch of different ways that you can engage with that. There's also a free practice mode where you can just hop in a car on an empty track, which is obviously good fun if you just want to drive around. For me, I'm mostly an online racer. I like racing against humans. Some of the AI behavior in this race will definitely show you why I prefer to drive against humans, but also just because I like to be sort of vaguely casually competitive with my sim racing. So online is where I get most of the enjoyment. And I will also say that having friends with servers and having friends with server businesses, in terms of online accessibility, I don't necessarily need that just being able to join your friends. It is convenient, but it's not a thing that I need. So from my perspective, the thing that is most important is the thing that is probably most important to a lot of the people listening to this right now, and what a lot of people have probably been waiting for me to start talking about, which is the physics. I'm going to roll force feedback into this same discussion. I know that a lot of people tend to kind of separate the physics and the force feedback as two kind of separate parts of a sim when they're talking about them, but to be honest, they're so intertwined that a lot of the time it's very difficult to tell the difference between bad force feedback and bad physics being communicated accurately through force feedback. It's just the physics underlying are not very good. So I'm going to talk about both of them at the same time. Right. For a while now, AMS2 has not been my favourite sim. It has not been my second favourite sim. I don't really think it's been my third favourite sim in terms of how it's been driving. It's been kind of far down the list, just in terms of handling, just in terms of physics. And the reason for that is because it's never felt like the car is connected to the road properly. I'm going to go into a bit more detail as to what that means, but what I want to say straight away is that version 1.4 has improved that. It has not fixed it, but it has certainly improved it. So where the game is at the moment, I would say this is not quite on the level of, for my personal taste, it's not quite on the level of AC or ACC or iRacing, but I would say that it's close, and it's closer than it's ever been. The game has a lot going for it. You can definitely feel that there is a very detailed underlying physics model. You can feel that the suspension is doing a lot. You can feel that the tyres are gripping and losing grip, and you can feel the difference between different surfaces, different curbs or grass, or even between being on the clean line and the dirty side of the track. You can feel it when you go over bumps or when you go over elevation change. Here at Daytona, it's very noticeable, the change in the physics when you're on the oval and you've got that compression in the car compared to when you're on the flat. There is a lot happening, and I would not for a moment say that the physics model in this game is simplistic. If you're looking for something that is just vaguely fun and kind of drives like a car, AMS2 definitely hits that. But I think where it stumbles is when you really start pushing the game to its limits, or rather when you start pushing the car that you're in to its limits, which at the end of the day, I believe is what all of us are trying to do in a sim. Even if you don't think that you are some kind of esports tier driver who's hot lapping all the time, at the end of the day you are pushing the car's limits. You're pushing the car to the limit of grip, and it's on that limit that AMS2, starts to break down. Okay, my grievances with this game. It kind of starts with the front axle. I have heard a few other people talk about this. A few other people have mentioned how they haven't felt like it's been particularly communicative in terms of what the front of the car is doing. And I would say that yes, it's not that communicative sometimes. Sometimes it's very communicative. The problem, though, is it will not deal with the slip angle of the tyres very well. It doesn't feel consistent. It doesn't feel intuitive by any means. And it doesn't feel like slip angle affects the tyres in the way that it would in another simulator. I will also say that longitudinal slip is also a bit of an issue with this game in terms of under deceleration and acceleration. There's some weirdness in terms of the way that the game handles slip. When the car is gripping, when the car is not sliding at all, when it is on rails, this game feels brilliant. If you drive a car, like for example the modern F1 car, the DPI car here, the P1 class cars, or any other car that has a lot of downforce, and you are driving at 0.8, 80% of the capability of the car, you will be able to have a lot of fun, because the game handles grippy handling really well. You can feel the weight of the car shift around, you can feel the suspension, you can feel the car reacting to the road. It's when those tyres start to slip that you start to get some weirdness happening. I think this is best exemplified by braking. During the footage in the background, you might see quite a few moments, especially early on, where I have totally messed up my braking. And there's not really a simple explanation as to why. So when you first load into AMS2, there's a few oddities that you will notice immediately. Firstly, if you go into the settings menu and set up your controls, the default sensitivity for your brake pedal is something like 35, out of 100, whereas for the brake pedal, whereas the throttle pedal is 50, and I would expect it to be 50 because I would have thought that 50 would be linear, just in terms of it being the same as in other simulators, but 35 seems to be the way that the devs want it to be set up. I have tried it on 50 and I've tried it on 35. 35 does seem better, so I'm not sure why it's 35, but sure. Secondly, if you load into a car and go into the setup menu, the brake pressure is always on 90% by default. You can go up to 100, but it starts at 90%. Now, I understand, based on other simulators, that sometimes there might be a brake pressure that you want to go up to that's actually higher than the optimal. So starting at 100%, you might want to go up to 110% brake pressure, and that's actually too much brake pressure. So perhaps 90% is meant to be optimal brake pressure, and that extra 10% is just giving you a bit of leeway for increasing it if you want increased sharpness of the brakes. In which case, why isn't 90% 100, and why can't you go over 100%? A strange choice just in terms of communicating it. But what both of those things end up doing or contributing to is a lot of uncertainty on the brakes. And this is wrapped up with just the handling of the car under deceleration. When you hit the brake pedal hard, first of all, I find it very difficult to judge braking distances. It feels inconsistent, and I don't know whether it is inconsistent or whether I'm just struggling with that 35% brake sensitivity or linearity, or whichever one it is in the settings menu, or if I'm struggling with the 90% versus 100% brake pressure, or if I'm just struggling with the way that the tyres react to slip. But I find it very difficult to consistently brake at the same point and get the same result. I use a load cell brake pedal. I use the Fanatec CSL load cell pedals, and I feel like I'm very consistent, at least in AC, and I feel like I can be consistent in ACC, and I feel like I can be consistent in iRacing. To be honest, I always used to feel like I could be consistent in Project Cars 2. Now, that game was by no means perfect in terms of its physics, but I did feel like I could be consistent in terms of braking at the same point and getting the same outcome. But in this game, I struggle, and to me that is weird. Sometimes you'll go into a braking point and the front tyres will just totally lock up, and it's impossible to save that lock, to come off the brake pedal a little bit or come off it and go back onto it, get the front tyres to grip back up and stop that lock. It feels very, very easy, even with the tiniest little steering input, to immediately start locking those front brakes. Now, I would say, okay, well, I could just reduce the brake pressure and it would stop that from being so sensitive. Sure, but at high speed, at max speed, the brakes aren't locking, so you would want the brake pressure to be as high as possible. And it ends up being this weird dance between, do I want the brakes to be like easy to use and intuitive, or do I want them to perform how I would expect them to perform? Do I want them to perform at their maximum ability? And this comes also into brake bias. I've always been a driver that tends to have a more rearward brake bias than others. For whatever reason, I like to have my brake bias a little bit further back. I like a bit of rotation on the entry to a corner. I don't like my front tyres locking, and I can deal with a little bit of slip under deceleration. I can just deal with that, put up with it, and as long as I can get good braking performance, I'm fine with that. Sometimes I have been known to set my brake pressure, my brake bias rather, a little bit too far back, and I know that sometimes that can reduce performance of the brakes, but it's just my personal preference. In this game though, I'll be getting that front locking. I'll go, okay, let's move the brake bias back a little bit, and then I end up with inconsistent spins, where I'll brake one time in a straight line and I will be fine, and I'll go into the corner and it'll be great. And then the next time round, I'll feel like I'll brake at exactly the same point in exactly the same way, and I spin, even in a straight line. Again, it's in terms of me feeling like I'm putting the same input in, but getting a different result. Whether I am or not, I can't say. I haven't gone in and looked at telemetry data and said, okay, I'm being inconsistent, and it's a problem with me. But I've never had this issue in any other simulator. I like to think that I'm fairly experienced in terms of sim racing, fairly decent in most sims, and AMS2 by far is the simulator that I've had the most trouble with the brakes on. As of version 1.4, that has got to be my number one biggest problem with this game, is the brakes. If they could fix that braking, if they could make it so that the tyres grip up again after locking a little bit easier. It's clearly some kind of physics to do with the tyre slipping or the surface temperature of the tyre when it's locking. If they can fix that, I will be massively happy, and it will massively improve my enjoyment of AMS2. Alternatively, if they can clarify settings and clarify something that I'm doing terribly wrong with the way that I have the game set up, then equally, sure, I'd be on board with that. Maybe I'm doing something terribly wrong and I'm the issue in terms of inconsistency. But to be honest, I don't feel like I am. I feel like the game is just inconsistent. The second thing to note in terms of the front axle of the car, in terms of that inconsistency again, is the way in which the front tyres grip on kind of entry to mid-corner phase, in terms of shifting the weight balance of a car. Now, sim racing has taught me over the years that what racing drivers are doing is steering with their feet, not with their hands, which sounds like a weird thing, but really what you're doing is you're shifting the weight backwards and forwards and then just vaguely directing the car with the steering wheel. The brake pedal is for shifting the weight to the nose of the car, or lifting off the accelerator equally, and coming off the brake pedal or going onto the accelerator is for moving the brake towards the rear of the car. So if you want more front grip, you want to move that weight to the front. If you want more rear grip, you want to move that weight to the rear. And then the steering wheel is just for guiding which direction that is going to give you some kind of acceleration. Now, in AMS2, obviously, because it's a perfectly accomplished simulator, you want to do things like trail brake. You want to push the nose in with the brake pedal. You want to be patient on the power, be smooth on power application, so as not to cause loads of understeer when you shift that weight to the rear of the car. But I've always felt that on entry to the corner, keeping the weight on the nose of the car is very, very difficult to do. And it feels like those front tyres just start slipping for no reason. It comes back to that connection between the car and the road. It doesn't feel like the front tyres ever fully grip. You'll notice that in this race, by the way, I do definitely have some issues in terms of tyre pressures. I set up my setup incorrectly in terms of my pressures, and I also set up my pit stop strategy incorrectly in terms of pressures. So the pressures are all over the place during this race. But even with correct pressures, and even with correct temperatures, even with a fully rubbered in track, even with a suspension and aero setup that I'm pretty happy with, and even with alignment that I've spent a lot of work on improving, again, this is not relevant necessarily to this race, but in other testing that I've done, I still don't feel like that front axle is fully connected. In a game like AC, if I set up a car properly, I can get it in a mode where that front axle is so dialed in, it feels like the car is on rails. I'm thinking back to driving a lot of the VRC IndyCar recently, doing lots of setups and setting hot laps in the VRC IndyCar. That car, once you get it set up properly, you really feel like the nose of the car does exactly what you want it to do. And then it's all about managing that rear and just about making sure that you're as delicate as possible with the car. I've never got to that point with any car in AMS2. If I put the car too much on the nose, it just feels like the rear has no grip. And if I put the car into what I would feel like would be quite a balanced setup during kind of steady state cornering, on entry to the corner and during that sort of turn-in phase of the corner, it just feels like the front tyres refuse to grip, and I have to put so much work in to getting the nose into the corner. And this is true of all the cars, whether it be a Formula car, whether it be a classic touring car, whether it be the DPI cars on screen, or even whether it be a go-kart. It feels like the struggle is to get the nose of the car turned in, to get the weight at the front, to get the grip of those front tyres to actually do what you tell them to do. I think both of these problems in terms of the brakes and the lateral grip of the front axle essentially comes down to tyre model. I'm guessing. Again, I'm not a sim racing engineer. I'm not. I've never worked in development of a simulator, so I don't really know this. But it feels like there's something wrong with the way that the tyres are working. And this is not specific to one type of tyre in AMS2 or one compound of tyre. This is true of pretty much all of the tyres in AMS2, which kind of hints to me that it's part of the fundamental model, part of the simulation. Something is going wrong, and I think Reza Studios are going to have to put a lot of time into figuring out what that is. Everything that I've heard from Reza has kind of hinted at the fact that developing on the Madness engine is a lot more difficult than they thought it would be, partly because it's so complex. Complexity is, of course, a good thing in simulators. We obviously want a simulator to be very deep and have a lot of detail in there, but complexity for a developer, not necessarily the best thing in the world. You want it to be obvious how to change certain parameters in order to improve it. That's why a lot of simulators always used to be on proprietary engines for a certain developer. IOI always had their own engine. Kunos had their own engine previously, and even Codemasters use their own engine. And the advantage of doing that is they know exactly how to fiddle with the different things. Sounds like some of that is quite difficult for Reza on this engine. Whereas they found it much easier in the rFactor engine which they were using before. I don't think it's impossible. I don't think that there is any reason why any physics engine couldn't result in a good quality simulation of something. It's just whether or not it's going to actually be feasible for Reza to get to that point. Because if the problem is fundamental enough in the physics engine, the amount of tweaking they're going to have to do to get it there is not going to be worth their time. That's my current worry as a result of the 1.4 update, is because those two areas haven't seen enough improvement. I'm just worried that we're not going to get to that point of the game being fully enjoyable ever, if development is as difficult as it sounds like it is. That being said, 1.4 has brought one massive, amazing, brilliant, glorious improvement, and that is on the rear axle, or more specifically the driven axle of the car. I'm talking about the drivetrain improvements. So one thing that Reza have put a lot of time into is not only the complex physics involved with transmissions, with differentials, and with engines in terms of the amount of rolling resistance, the effect that has on things like engine braking and stuff like that. But it feels like in this update, just purely in terms of differential behaviour, they've made a massive step forwards. Suddenly, I feel like I can go into a car and tweak the differential in a way that makes logical sense. If I want to increase the locking on exit to a corner on throttle, then I can increase the amount of diff power locking, and I can do the same thing with coast, and I can do the same thing with preload, and it makes sense. Obviously, the Madness engine has a lot of detail in terms of its driveline. You know, there are different types of differentials, stuff that I'm still trying to get to grips with, because it's not something I'm used to from AC, which has a much more simplistic way of dealing with differentials. But it really does feel like now those different settings have an effect, which they never used to. I can go into a car now and really start to tweak that diff, and it will improve the car. One of the first things that I did when hopping into the DPI car earlier today to record this race was I tweaked the diff. I reduced the number of clutches, reduced a bit of the locking effect, both on exit and entry, kind of opened up that diff a little bit. After doing the full race, I kind of realised that I'd maybe opened it a little bit too much, and I know a few tweaks that I would go back to and change in my setup as a result of that. But the thing is, I was able to get that communicated back to me from the car, and when I tweaked something, I could then tell while I was driving it, which never used to be the case with AMS2. That, for me, is a massive improvement, and I think when I'm driving a car like the DPI car that I'm very comfortable in, that is almost a game changer. Almost. The reason that I say almost comes down to the content of the game, and it comes down to some of the inconsistencies from car to car. Now, the reason that I've picked the DPI car, other than the fact that Multiclass is great, Daytona is great, I love prototypes, and I thought it would be good fun and a cool video to watch, comes down to two factors relating to physics. Firstly, it is a downforce car, so the previously stated issues in terms of tyre grip are slightly reduced just because I have more grip to play with in total. And then also, the DPI car is one of the cars where it feels like they've put more time into both the tyres and that drivetrain tuning. If I instead was to drive, let's say, the P4 cars, the slowest prototype cars, or the GT5 Ginetta, or some of the other cars in the game that have perhaps had a little bit less attention from the devs, some of that connection, some of that easy to understand grip in terms of traction, throttle application, starts to disappear, and we start to get that old AMS2 strange kind of constantly sliding feeling that I didn't like. That's not to say that there haven't been improvements across the board. There definitely has been some slight improvements, even to those cars that I like the least, even to some of the most tricky cars in the game. There have definitely been some force feedback improvements across the board. The cars feel a little bit more communicative in their steering. I feel like I can feel what the suspension is doing a little bit better through the steering wheel, although again that doesn't translate to what the tyres are doing, simply because I don't think the actual underlying simulation knows what the front tyres are doing. But that is definitely an improvement. Overall, 1.4 in terms of physics is a step in the right direction. Now, Reza hyped up this update quite a lot when they were about to release it. They'd said a lot in terms of this being a big step forward, in terms of this being the point at which they were happy with the game. Kind of almost like a relaunch. It kind of sounded like they wanted this to be 1.0, but because of, you know, all the issues with development, this isn't the state that the game launched in. It kind of hinted at this being version 1.0, and the game was, I hesitate to say finished, but complete, and then they would start improving it afterwards. If this is indeed where Reza feel like the game is where they want it to be, I'm not convinced, to be honest. Those holes in the physics model, those holes in the tyre model, I think that they are big enough that I don't think that AMS2 can really stand up as a serious competitive sim as something like ACC does at the moment, or even AC. I keep coming back to those Kunos sims because I really do think they have some of the most robust physics models, just in terms of them being intuitive, in terms of them being understandable, communicative to the driver. Yes, there are simulators with lots of more detail out there. I honestly think that the Madness engine and AMS2 does have more detail, does have more going on under the hood than at least AC, if not maybe even ACC, although perhaps in some ways not. But because the game doesn't execute on that properly, we don't get that communicated to the driver, it doesn't feel understandable, it doesn't feel consistent, that detail's wasted. At the end of the day, just the number of things that you are simulating doesn't matter if you're not simulating them correctly, and if those things aren't easily understood and easily communicated to the driver. I would much prefer to drive a more simplistic sim that was doing it more communicatively, and I don't think that's a word, being more communicative and felt a bit more intuitive than a more complex sim that didn't. This is just exemplified by the fact that AC is still my favourite sim. I do think that AC is kind of outdated in a lot of ways. Obviously ACC is far more complex, but I don't think ACC quite has the communication in terms of force feedback or the intuitiveness just in terms of the way the cars drive. Same with rFactor 2. I've never felt like the tyre model, as complex and impressive as it might be, has been particularly intuitive or particularly communicative to the driver. At the end of the day, that's what a simulator is supposed to do. It's supposed to do all this complicated maths and then tell you what is happening so that you can accurately input into the sim what you want to, so that you can drive the car. AMS2 isn't doing that at the moment. I feel lost a lot of the time. I hop into a car that I feel like I should know how to approach it, how to, or like vague directions in terms of how to set it up on a track that I know very well and know the lines on and have driven thousands of laps of in other simulators. But then in AMS2, I feel lost in terms of the direction that I'm supposed to be taking the car. I don't know how to adjust the drivetrain to properly get that acceleration or deceleration in and out of a corner, or I don't know how to set up the brakes accurately so that I can hit those braking points consistently. And worst of all, I don't know what I'm supposed to do to get the nose of the car to turn in without just making the car a horrible, oversteery mess. At the end of the day, the game does feel like it is developed to be a game for people that really like sliding cars. If you want to drift cars all day, alright, maybe if you don't, maybe not if you want to drift cars all day, but if you like your cars to be constantly sliding all over the place. You like to be sawing at the wheel constantly. You're not particularly bothered about going fast. AMS2 is definitely the sim for you. But if you want a sim to be a simulation, and if you want it to be competitive and kind of deep, I suppose, at the moment I don't think AMS2 is quite there. Right, that's kind of enough about physics. I don't want to go on about it forever. I think I've said most of what I wanted to say about the physics, about the force feedback, about the cars. There's a few other things that I just wanted to cover in terms of this update. They said they've made some improvements to the AI. Not sure I can tell. I have driven some single class races before you complain, and they were obviously better than multi-class because the AI has no idea what to do with multi-class whatsoever. I'm sure that you've seen some of that, especially during practice, of the cars just not realising that I'm there. But even in single class races, they'll take weird lines, they'll brake on straights, they won't know how to maintain gaps, they will just swerve backwards and forwards randomly. They still do this weird thing where they will consistently brake, let's say at the 100 meter board every single lap, which is way too early because you're supposed to be braking at 75 meters, and then when you get alongside them they'll brake at the 50 meter board all of a sudden. And you're like, well, where did that come from? Why were you braking so early before, and now when I'm next to you, that you brake super late? They don't seem to have any awareness of different types of sessions. In practice and in quali, they don't get out of your way, and they will try and overtake you if they catch you. They won't back off and leave a gap. During the full course yellows in this race, you'll have noticed sometimes they're acting a little bit strangely, kind of accelerating and decelerating, swerving left and right, not warming their tyres, but just like getting confused by the pace of the car ahead. I will say that in the grand scheme of things, the AI are pretty raceable. It's quite enjoyable to drive against them. Don't expect it to be like driving online against humans, obviously, because they're AI, but I'd say they were pretty good AI to race against, pretty enjoyable. In terms of the content, so I have driven the new AMG GT4 car. It was pretty fun. I don't think GT4 is where AMS2 shines. I think if you want to drive GT3 or GT4, get ACC. If that's all you're interested in, there is no point playing this game whatsoever. Just buy ACC. It is designed for those. It is better at those. That being said, we also got Spa, the 2020 layout, which is cool. I like that. I've been driving a mod of it in AC for quite a while, and to see a more official version coming to AMS2 is nice. And hopefully like ACC gets updated with it in the future, so we get some nice laser scans of the new changes. I actually don't know whether it's a laser scan in AMS2, but I don't think they will have had chance to laser scan it since the real track has been updated, so I don't know. But yeah, the content is decent. I haven't had chance to try oval racing. Oval racing has never been a thing that I'm particularly interested in. I think it's cool. I kind of like watching some of it, but I don't really like doing it. I'm kind of bad at it. I've never really understood the whole asymmetrical setup thing in terms of getting around ovals well, so I just kind of gave up. It's just not my forte. It's not what I like doing in sim. But I have driven the from the previous update, the classic Indy cars or classic kart cars or whatever they are. They're great fun. I've seen a lot of people kind of waxing lyrical about how brilliant those cars are and how they prove what AMS2 could be. I think they're good cars. I think they are up there in terms of the content. I honestly think that this DPI car is more fun. Maybe that's just personal preference, but I think it actually feels a bit higher quality, and a bit more like a simulator. Maybe I'm wrong. Otherwise, yeah, I think my thoughts on AMS2 are generally positive. I think that the game is good, and that's kind of where I want to leave it. If you are new to my channel, I very rarely upload. But when I do upload, I tend to upload sim racing content. So if you want to see any reviews of simulators, any reviews of things like updates to any sims or any mods for content, if you want to see the occasional hot lap of me kind of flexing a good lap time if I've managed to do it in preparation for an online race in AC, all those things tend to pop up on my channel from time to time. I do intend to upload more now that I've finally got settled and got moved. I recently bought a sim rig. I have a Next Level Racing FGT. I've never used to have a sim rig. I used to have my wheel bolted to my desk, and I had a wheelie chair with the wheels taken off, and that was my sim rig. But finally I have something rigid and something that stays in one place. So I've been thoroughly enjoying using that. So hopefully I'll get more time to do a bit more sim racing. So if you are interested in any of that content, feel free to subscribe. I have been doing a little bit of streaming over on Twitch. I did actually stream a bit of this game on the day of the update over on my Twitch. I was just kind of trying streaming on Twitch. I think what I might do is, if I ever want to stream sim racing, is stream it to my YouTube channel, and if I ever want to stream anything else, to stream it over on Twitch. So I've been streaming a bit of Halo and things like that over there. I think that's probably a better way to split it out. So if you are interested in any of that, please do go and follow me on there. I would like to say that I'll see you soon after the end of this video, but to be honest, I don't know. As you can see, this is the end of the race. In case you were paying attention to it, you may have noticed that I managed to win. There was a bit of weirdness with the full course yellows there in that race, where the AI were perhaps pitting sub-optimally. I managed to get an early pit stop in and catch back up. And because of a couple more full course cautions, I had enough fuel to go to the end, which was nice. I had more than enough fuel, in fact, to go to the end because there were so many of them. I really do like the full course cautions. They're pretty cool in terms of, especially because cautions breed cautions, right? Just like in real racing. So that was kind of cool. But it was pretty fun to have a proper race in this game. Do a full 24-hour day-night cycle. Enjoy that beautiful immersion that this game offers. And enjoy a bit of multi-class racing. I know that I've been quite negative during this video. I do wish that I had more positive to say, and I do really wish that I enjoyed this game more. I may well drive some more of it. Maybe I will upload some more slightly shorter form videos, some more traditional videos like I have done in the past of me driving around a track and talking crap while doing it. But I did just want to kind of get my thoughts fully out there on the update before doing that. Anyway, as I said, if you did enjoy, please do subscribe. Please do follow me. And also, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on AMS2. Pop them in the comments below. I always read everything and respond to everything because, to be honest, I just like talking about sims. In case you hadn't noticed, for the last hour, I like talking about sim racing. Okay, right. That's the end of the video. I will hopefully see you guys next time.